Okay, people, let's start. So, first of all, something tells me that not everybody who's taking this course is in this way. For people who are absent, I have only one thing to say. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Okay? This is, and good luck on the exam. Anyway, so we have a very interesting class today. We need to talk about political philosophy. So let me begin by saying a couple things. So first of all, why should you care about political philosophy? That's an interesting question. You know, if you don't care about political philosophy cares about you. So, it's a very strange task to try to justify doing political philosophy for people. It's like, why do you need to know how to take a second derivative? That's an interesting question. Why do you need to know how to live your life? Some people somehow take for granted that knowing how to take a second derivative is an important piece of knowledge, and knowing how to live your life is not. Or somehow it's easy or obvious and doesn't require thinking. Anyway, but this is political philosophy in general. We're not doing political philosophy today. We're doing medieval political philosophy. Medieval political philosophy is an interesting beast. Because medieval political philosophy, first of all, comes from a certain peculiar point in the history of humanity. I mean, it's not contemporary philosophy. What do the medievals have to say to us? Why do we want to read this ancient stuff? And I think there's an important answer to this question, in the sense that hopefully in the course of this lecture, I will point to some, it's valuable to study the history of ideas simply in order to understand the history of ideas. For example, to see certain prejudice that medieval political philosophy takes for granted, and maybe to try to see our prejudice in this light. This is an important thing. I mean, I shouldn't begin with this thought, but I'm afraid I might forget otherwise. Let me say this immediately. In the Middle Ages, it was absolutely obvious to everybody that kingship is the best form of government. We don't think this anymore. And something tells me that in 100 or maybe in a couple hundred years, the same people of the future, philosophers of the future, will look at us and will say, oh, these simpletons in the 21st century thought that capitalism is the best form of organizing society. It's the same kind of prejudice. Now, again, this is not a knockdown argument against a capitalist parliamentarist organization of life. It's not a knockdown argument, but it's something to think about. So it's, again, a lesson in intellectual humility. The second reason to study medieval political philosophy is because it has a huge influence on later political philosophy. And especially in the second semester, we will talk about giants of European political thought, such as Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and there's an important line of influence going from the Middle Ages, and especially probably the first thing that we shall begin the second semester with, talking about the Protestant Reformation and Martin Luther. And these debates come straight out of today's class. So this class is going to be important because the topics that we're discussing will be on the exam on next Saturday, but also because we will continue these discussions in the next semester. So we're going to be talking about something that will be on the exam in spring, if you want. Anyway, now the most important. So I mean, if you want to oversimplify, I mean, the philosophy in the Middle Ages is faith and reason, revelation and reason. We are mostly going to be interested in reason, because revelation, again, especially when I teach this to international relations students, I mean, we don't pay much attention to revelation. I mean, if you stand up in United Nations and try to address people, referring to the Bible or the Quran, people will not be, the United Nations will not be sympathetic. We're past that. Not necessarily philosophically, but at least politically. It's not that I have a knockdown argument against the Bible or the Quran, but I have a knockdown political argument against the Bible or the Quran. As a matter of real politics, it is impossible to base our contemporary societies and our contemporary international order on these books that some people to this day consider holy. But so it's important to understand that this is going to be a fundamental limitation of every philosopher I'm going to talk about today, in the sense that they're medieval and not contemporary. But still, things that they say, especially within the reason of limits alone, are going to be interesting. And even places where we disagree with them could teach us something in the sense of by a negative example, if you want. Okay. All of this was by way of introduction. So, like in some sense, the lecture hasn't begun yet. Let me begin the lecture proper. So what are we talking about today? Again, medieval political philosophy. So political philosophy has relation to moral philosophy. So we are going to be asking, what is the good? Individually, but also what is the common good? And this is my preliminary definition of politics. This is my preliminary definition of political philosophy. It is an attempt to reason about the common good. Now, medieval political philosophy has sources. And some of them maybe I should list. The first one, and as I already mentioned, possibly the most problematic one. So this would be the sources of medieval political philosophy or political theory. So one is the Bible. And we will need to say at least a couple of words about the Bible in a second. The second one is the most authoritative. So we're medieval political philosophy. We are talking about Christian Catholic West, Catholic Western Europe. This is what we're talking about. I'm not talking about all philosophy in all times and all places. Catholic Western Europe. Maybe I should write this on the board somewhere. Medieval political philosophy meaning Catholic Western Europe. One of the key authorities for the Christian Middle Ages is going to be Augustine. In all spheres, but importantly in political philosophy especially. When we talk about Augustine, I will also need to say at least a couple words about Paul, who is known to Christians as Saint Paul, who's known to most Christians as Saint Paul, not all Christians. The next source is going to be Greek and Roman writers. Now, in the beginning of Christian Middle Ages, Aristotle is unknown and unimportant. His works are lost, so we're not talking about Aristotle in the beginning. However, approximately since the 12th century, the date is not important, Aristotle gets translated from Arabic, mostly, into Latin. Aristotle had a huge influence in the Islamic world, and so he becomes rediscovered in the West. Like Aristotle is lost in the West for several centuries, and now he's being rediscovered. So Aristotle, among the Greeks and the Romans, is going to become hugely influential, but only in the 12th century. However, everybody whom we're going to talk about, they have all read Aristotle, and they're all Aristotelians of one form or another. There's a bunch of other things to mention. I mean, for example, like in brackets and with a question mark, we can mention Roman law. This is going to be important as well, but less important. And in some sense, again, the task of medieval scholasticism is going to be to put these various sources together, disentangle what they're saying. Let's keep in mind, again, that all of this, in the future, again, something that we will not talk about in this lecture, so let me write this somewhere off to this side. All of this will have relation to the Protestant Reformation, and especially to Martin Luther. And Luther will probably be the first class in January. So we're not talking about Luther today, but this is going to be your first class in January, basically. Okay, so, and another question which was actually one of the most important questions of the Protestant Reformation is the relationship between church and state. Relationship between church and state. Sort of, let's keep this in mind. This is not the only question of medieval political philosophy, but this is maybe the most important one. Okay, so, many things to talk. I mean, in principle, it's a huge topic. We could have a whole course just on medieval political philosophy. That would be an interesting course. Someday I should teach a course like this, but not today. So we have to start somewhere, and we're going to start in the middle of things. And I want to begin by contrasting Aquinas and Augustine. So we have these two very important philosophers. Again, both of them in the Catholic tradition considered to be saints. But we're not in the Catholic tradition. So I'm just going to write Augustine and Aquinas. Strictly speaking, again, his name is Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas. You might have heard of this guy before. But I'll just call him Aquinas. So, and I remind you that Augustine is writing in the 4th century CE, right? And Aquinas is writing in the 13th century CE. So, like 800 years, basically, after. Maybe 850 years after Augustine. And in some sense, by the way, this is all of the Christian Middle Ages for you. Begins with Augustine, ends with Aquinas. There are a couple people after Aquinas who are important. We'll talk about them. But by and large, this is the Christian Middle Ages. Before Augustine, you have a classical antiquity. After Aquinas, you have Protestant Reformation. It's an oversimplified view of history of philosophy, but for our purposes, it's going to suffice. It's going to be good. So immediately, Augustine is a Neoplatonist. Now, Neoplatonist, not a Platonist. Was Plato a Platonist? Wonderful questions. Okay, this is a separate, it's a different lecture which Krista already gave to you. But Plato never wrote treatises. Plato writes dialogues. So who the hell knows what Plato's political philosophy was? This is a serious question. It's a serious unsolved question. We do not know what Plato's political philosophy is. There are guesses, intelligent, intellectual guesses, but still, Plato's political philosophy is unavailable to us because he writes dialogues. He never writes in his own voice. But later, hundreds of years after Plato had died, there was a group of philosophers who systematized Plato and created, filled in the missing pieces. And the most important among them is, of course, Plotinus, as you probably should know. Well, as you absolutely should know, Plotinus and the Neoplatonist synthesis. So everything I say in this class about Plato is this Neoplatonic interpretation, or I would say misinterpretation of Plato. Okay, and Aquinas is an Aristotelian. So Augustine is a Neoplatonist and Aquinas is an Aristotelian. And this is going to have important implications. So we already talked about Plato and Aristotle, and you know something about their approach to politics. Again, whenever I say Plato in this class, I'm talking about Neoplatonic, quote-unquote, misinterpretation of Plato. Plato is complicated. Plato has later dialogues like Statesman and the Laws. So again, Plato's thought is evolving and unclear, and we don't have Plato's chronology, so who knows? Laws, is it later, before or after Republic? The common consensus is that Laws is written after the Republic, but who knows? Maybe it was written before. It's a complicated question. We don't have Plato's own chronology. Anyway, so for the Neoplatonist Plato, what is politics? What is this world? This world is the shadow of the one true world of perfect forms. This world is a hunk of decaying matter. The Heraclitean world of flux of appearances. This world is sinful and horrible and full of disease and decay. This world does not interest us. The world is, I could write evil, but that's a technical term. And for Augustine, as you remember, evil does not exist, so I cannot write the world is evil. But the world is, let's contrast. The material world is not the spiritual world, and the spiritual world is so much more important than the material world. And therefore, politics can only be a necessary evil. Necessary evil. Like ideally, if you could, you would not engage in politics at all. You will remember in Plato's Republic, Socrates, not Plato, because Plato is not speaking in Plato's Republic, but Socrates says in Plato's Republic that the only thing that philosophers care about is contemplation of eternal forms. They do not want to rule. Philosopher kings do not want to rule. They accept political rule because it is a necessity. They have to accept it. The same way that you go to the dentist to suffer the necessary evil for the greater good of having your teeth healthy, right? In exactly the same fashion, the Platonic philosopher kings will accept rule as a necessary evil, but they do not want to rule. And strictly speaking, it is a distraction from the only thing they want to do in life, which is contemplate eternal forms. Or, as Augustine would say, contemplate God. But let's remember that Plato is writing before Jesus' grandma is born, so Plato is not a Christian, okay? Even though Nietzsche very famously said that Christianity is Platonism for the masses. That's a complicated, different class. Okay, so let's keep in mind that neither Plato nor Aristotle are Christians. And again, if this was a proper philosophy course and we were to be pedantic, we would see all the ways in which Plato and Aristotle, especially Aristotle, disagree with Christianity. But this is in this class we don't have to deal with that, like in today's lecture. So politics is a necessary evil, and basically Augustine is going to say that human beings are sinful. So that's the doctrine of original sin. So all human beings are sinful, horrible, evil, wicked. Human beings, according to Augustine, are trash on the way to hell. The vast majority of people will burn in hell. Even the newborn babies, consumed by lust and other sinful passions, will burn in hell. Even if they were baptized, doesn't matter. The vast majority of people. By right, because we're sinful and abhorrent in the face of God, God looks at us and hates us, rightfully, because we are hateful. But, says Augustine, by God's infinite mercy, for his own reasons, which we cannot understand, God will choose to save some. Even though all of us deserve to go to hell, the very few select will be saved. And as a matter of fact, although I don't need to worry about this too much today, this is the doctrine of predestination. Predestination. God already knows before you are born whether you will be saved or damned. And again, human beings by nature are evil, cannot not sin. We are all essentially sinful. And the only ones among us who will not sin are doing so because God intervenes. Basically, God, before you are born, decides to give you grace. Grace. So, like God's special mercy, like he casts a spell on you, which allows you to do good things, like grace. Grace, I suppose in Russian, something like благодать. That's, again, the translation of the word is not important. God confers a special gift to you, which allows you not to sin. And without this gift, everybody would be a horrible sinner. And we don't deserve any of this. And God decides for his own reasons, which are mysterious to us. God is not a jerk. God is not unjust. He has his own reasons, which we cannot understand simply. Anyway, but still, those of us who are going to hell justly and shouldn't complain about it. And which is the majority of people, for Augustine. And therefore, and again, so you see, I mean, many people today, a lot of people today would completely disagree with Augustine's logic. I mean, most people today will find all this horrifying. But still, we talk about Augustine. I mean, if you took a University of London course in political theory, you would study Augustine all the way, at least up until the third year. Why? Why are we talking about Augustine? Because there's a secular reading of Augustine. Augustine is one of the founders of the realist tradition. And this is what we're talking about. Now, forget all of this theological stuff, because, there is no consensus about theology today. But there is a group of scholars, again, usually called, in politics, called the realist tradition. And Augustine would be one of the co-founders of the realist tradition of political theory. So realism. And the essence of this tradition is that human beings are wicked, and therefore the task of government is to suppress human wickedness, to suppress through force and fear. So the task of government is to use force and fear to suppress people into obedience. Does this remind you of anybody from school or something? How about Thomas Hobbes, who says that human beings are evil by nature and you need a strong government to keep people in check. Otherwise, the society degenerates into a civil war of all against all. So maybe even let's write this. Compare to Hobbes. So again, Augustine is not 100% Hobbes, but there's an interesting point of comparison. And in general, this world for Augustine is a veil of tears or a welter of sorrow. Nothing good can exist in this world. So government, at best, is a necessary evil for Augustine. And also he says, in a very interesting turn of phrase, that Augustine says that in principle, there is no interesting difference between the government and a band of robbers. Again, in some sense, you will only get true, legitimate political authority and true human community only after you die and God reestablishes, at the end of times, reestablishes the kingdom of heaven on earth. But before God reestablishes his kingdom, commonly known as paradise, there can be no legitimate political authority, something like that. And so what do you do as a believer? Well, as a believer, again, you try your best. You try your best, which is difficult, but you have to try. What happens if you live under a tyranny for Augustine? Tyranny. Augustine says, well, all power, and this is he's taking this from the Bible. So it's important, and I need to talk about this. All power comes from God. All power comes from God, and therefore, authority should not be resisted. The medieval theologians would point to Jesus submitting to Pontius Pilate. Jesus submitting to Pontius Pilate. So all authority comes from God, and even the authority of Pontius Pilate comes from God. And Jesus should not disobey Pontius Pilate. So if you're living under a tyranny, you should always submit. You should always submit, because a tyranny is either a just punishment incurred by you. So yeah, the tyrant may be horrible, maybe he's doing horrible things, you're like Hitler during the Holocaust. But this is righteous punishment, and you dare not resist, because all power, even Hitler's power, comes from God. Or maybe you are not wicked, but this is a test. This is a test. God is testing you. He's testing you, trying to see what you are going to do in the face of this. In the face of this threat, right? But either way, so you are never allowed to disobey or to make revolution or anything like that. Maybe with a certain exception. So what is this exception? The exception is that if the tyrant, so you should always obey what the tyrant tells you to do. But if the tyrant orders you to disobey God's law, for example, if you are a Christian and the Roman Emperor Nero forces you to sacrifice to the pagan gods, you non-violently protest and accept your death. Accept martyr's death. Death by martyrdom. Мученическая смерть. Death by martyrdom. This is Augustine. And Immanuel Kant is going to repeat most of this next year. Although I'm not sure if we're going to talk about political philosophy of Immanuel Kant, but this is basically Immanuel Kant for you here on the board. You're never allowed to do so. Immanuel Kant would say that, if you're faced with Nazi Germany, non-violent protest, but in general you obey the law, you obey the rules, and you passively and obediently go to the concentration camp to die, and wait for God to judge you in the afterlife. Excellent political advice. Anyway, so okay, probably more things to talk about in Augustine, but if I remember, of course, the most important thing is the Doctrine of Two Cities. So we have these two cities, the city of God and the city of man. The notion is that before we die and before we're judged, we do not know to which city we belong, so we're all mixed together. Both of these cities are mixed together. And, in principle, what are we talking about here? Well, is this a doctrine of separation of church and state? No. But Augustine basically, he doesn't really have a clear doctrine. He doesn't really have a ruling on what the people are supposed to do. But in general, if you are a believer, you should not really care about politics very much. Care about your soul. But if you are a believer and you find yourself in a situation where you can influence what the government is doing, and this would be good in general, then you may proceed. Example. Let's imagine you're a bishop and you can appeal to the Roman emperor to kill heretics and burn down their monasteries. Go for it. It's legit. Because this is God's purpose. So most of the time, you as a believer should not interfere in politics. But sometimes, when this may yield good results, sometimes the state may be co-opted by the church. But it's not like the bishop has the power to order the prince around. Okay? So it's not a doctrine of subordination. So it's like, I would say that in general, for Augustine, Caesar, the Kaiser, right, is or the law, the supreme political authority. Let me write Caesar. So Caesar is above everybody, including above the Pope, who is the Bishop of Rome. But in certain circumstances, the Pope could appeal to Caesar. Let me erase the word Pope, because the Pope doesn't really exist at this time in the Christian history. So we're talking about bishops and the people and everybody else. But you can appeal. Well, again, so heresy, complicated story, long discussion. But in general, Augustine will support military action against heretics if you think that this military action will have good results. Like, for example, maybe it will stop the spread of heresy, or it will convince people to change their mind, something like that. Because, like, in the beginning, I shouldn't talk about this, but just one sentence. In the beginning, Augustine was opposed to violent suppression of heresy, but then, when there was actually, as a matter of fact, some violent suppression of heresy, some of the former heretics came to Augustine and told him, well, this violent suppression actually helped me return back to, correct Orthodox faith, so, maybe it's a good idea. Anyway, so, digression. We don't need to worry about this too much. Okay, so this is Augustine. This is Augustine. Let's talk about Aquinas. Aquinas is an entirely different pair of shoes. Completely different. And Aquinas takes his bearing from Aristotle. And you remember, for Plato, this wonderful fresco, right, by Raphael, Plato pointing to the sky and Aristotle pointing down to earth. Well, first of all, Aristotle, unlike Aquinas, so Aristotle believes that the soul is not immortal, that humans have a mortal soul. This is going to be a big point of disagreement between Aquinas and Aristotle. Aristotle, as far as we can tell, does not believe that your soul will survive the death of the body. That soul is the formal cause of the motion of the body, so when your body dies, the soul disappears. Or it is because the soul dies, it is because the soul is destroyed, that is why the body dies, for Aristotle. But still, for Aristotle, again, this world is all that there is, and the purpose of human existence, this question of the good, individual good and common good. For Aristotle, the purpose of our life here on earth is to be happy here and now. Happiness here and now. So here, the material world was lower and less important than the spiritual world. Here we are talking about happiness. For Aristotle, here, if you want, here and now. But for Aquinas, who Christianizes Aristotle, also in the afterlife. And Augustine was very adamant that you either have to choose to love God and hate yourself. This is exactly the words that Augustine uses. You love God and hate yourself. Or you love yourself and hate God. There is no other option for Augustine. Not so for Aquinas. Not so for Aquinas. For Aquinas, you can both love yourself and love God. In fact, God gives you the law of reason, which you're supposed to do both at the same time. And there's nothing preventing a person under favorable circumstances to be happy in this life and in the afterlife. Of course, if you had to choose, for Aquinas, obviously you choose the afterlife. Afterlife is more important. Like for Augustine. But the afterlife is not all important. You should also try as much as possible to be happy here and now. So, and you remember, so Aristotle was a teleologist from the Greek word telos, which means aim or goal or purpose. And this teleological worldview basically again, against Augustine and against Augustine's Neoplatonism, says, no, this world is good. Why do we use this word teleology? Why do we use this word telos? Everything that exists down here exists with a reason and for a purpose. In fact, everything that exists is good. For Augustine and for Plato, it's kind of the other way around. Everything that exists is bad, even though evil doesn't exist, so it's semantically, logically speaking, complicated, but still, this world is bad for Augustine and Plato. This world is good for Aquinas and Aristotle. And governments, well, actually, plants and trees and mountains are all created by God, and they're good. And governments are also created by God, and they're good. And in fact, Aquinas and Aristotle, well, Aristotle has this phrase that man is by nature a political animal. Man is, or if you want, man is by nature a social and political animal. So man, by nature, is a social and political animal. Now, I use the word social and political because the Greek word is politikon, but polis in Greek means both a society and a state. But polis has both these connotations. So again, what does this mean? It means that for Plato and for Augustine, the other people, I mean this whole world, is one big distraction. Like ideally, if you could, you should just live somewhere in a cave alone. Like some Christian monks who escape from the world and live alone by themselves. This is not what Aquinas and what Aristotle are saying. Aquinas and Aristotle say that uniquely, human beings can only be truly human only in a good society, only in a good polis. And Aquinas and Aristotle will consider that most governments are good. So Aristotle famously has 6 regimes: aristocracy, oligarchy, democracy, polity, monarchy, and tyranny. But all 6, for Aristotle, including tyranny, are mostly good. And in fact, Aristotle would say that any government is better than no government. And Aquinas is a Christian, so Aquinas will say that even pagan states are mostly good. So even the pagans have this natural light of reason which allows them to order their affairs properly. So we're talking about, again, happiness here and now. So how should I put this? Okay, let me draw 2 pictures and then I'll explain how these pictures coincide with one another. So Aquinas says, following Aristotle, that the human community exists first of all to secure material well-being and security. Secondly, the polis exists to cultivate virtue. Again, I remind you that the word virtue does not mean anything unless you specify which moral philosophy you're talking about. The word good, virtue basically is synonymous with the word good. But what is it like to be a good individual? Aquinas has one answer, Augustine has a different answer, Plato has a third answer, Democritus has a fourth answer, and Nietzsche has a separate answer. Okay? Everybody understands this word differently. But for the purpose of this class, we don't really care. We don't really need to care much about this. Because when we talk about virtue for Aquinas, obviously we're talking about Christian virtue, which we know from the Bible, more or less. So this is his definition of the word virtue. But thirdly, and most importantly, the state exists, and this is Aquinas, not Aristotle. Aquinas, not Aristotle, to secure salvation. Salvation of our immortal soul. And this is actually the most important end of government. This is Aquinas, not Aristotle. Again, if this was a proper class in philosophy and we'd have many more hours to discuss this, we would talk about all the pedantic differences, how Aquinas is influenced by Roman Stoics, and therefore how Aquinas is actually different from Aristotle. But for the purposes of this class, we oversimplify. Aquinas just is Aristotle plus Christianity. It's literally speaking not true, but strictly speaking, if you want to be pedantic, it's not true. But as an oversimplification for the purpose of this class, Aquinas just is Aristotle plus the Bible. Okay? So Aristotle plus the Bible. There's another way to explain this picture of how Aquinas is Aristotle plus the Bible. There is one eternal law. And this eternal law comes from God. Now, does Aristotle believe in God? That's a very complicated question, and short answer, we don't know. Scholars disagree to this day. I mean, Aristotle certainly talks about gods, and Russell even talks about maybe 47 or 58 or something like that. But are we talking about one true God? Nah, complicated issues. I don't want to get bogged down there. So we have this eternal law, which either comes from one true God. Let me write Yahweh for Aquinas, or from some kind of orderly, rational principle of the universe for Aristotle. So either Yahweh or reason for Aristotle. And this eternal law governs all things at all times. Eternal law governs all things at all times. And there's a part of the eternal law which Aquinas calls natural law. And natural law governs the behavior of animals and people. So we're talking about animals and people. And this natural law is known to us naturally. It is implanted in our nature. For example, every animal tries to preserve itself, and every animal also tries to procreate, like have offspring, have sex, have children, that kind of thing, right? And Aquinas says we have this naturally because God implants this law in us. Again, if you want the law of self-preservation and procreation. So, self-preservation and procreation. The first commandment that God gives man in the Bible. Somebody. No? I'm just checking. So usually one person in the room who went to Sunday school. Be fruitful and multiply. The first commandment that God gives to people in the Bible. Anyway. Yeah. So, and from this natural law, we derive positive law. Now, what is the difference between natural law and positive law? Natural law is known to everybody, well, it's known to animals through instinct, and it's known to human beings through intellect. So again, I'm not sure if I should write this on the board. Aquinas is an intellectualist, not a voluntarist. We know law not through the will, like for example in Kant, but we know law only through the intellect. Like there's a direct rational derivation. Like I suppose, so it doesn't come from the will, Wille, right? But it comes from Vernunft, I guess, in Kantian terms, something like that. It doesn't matter, okay, for our purposes. So this is natural law. But then there's also positive law. And positive law are specific laws actually made by people for each other. So basically Aquinas says that deep down in our hearts, we all intuitively understand what is the right thing to do. Intuitively. Well, actually not intuitively, but intellectually, okay? Intuitively, meaning intellectually, we all understand what is the right thing to do. But the positive law actually positively prescribes what we should do. This is a settled, standing, known law, promulgated law promulgated by authorities. So this is, again, this would be the law of your conscience, source, right? And this would be the law of Russian Federation. I hope the distinction is painfully clear. Now for Aquinas, strictly speaking, in order for a law to be a law, it has to be in line with natural law. That's why we have this arrow down here. So strictly speaking, positive law, which goes against the law of nature, is no law at all. Difficult question. Let's ask this question. Not answer it, but ask it. What happens if the law of nature conflicts with positive law? What do? Are you allowed to just simply disobey? Are you allowed to do whatever? You read through the Constitution of Russian Federation, and by the light of your reason, you say, oh, this is irrational, therefore I'm free to not obey. How is that supposed to work? Okay, let's get that in a second. But let's just ask this as a question. And this is to oversimplify. Again, I told you, Aquinas is Aristotle plus the Bible. Aristotle plus the Bible. So this is Aristotle plus the Bible. So let's write Bible on the board. And the Bible is what Aquinas calls divine law. And divine law, so this is Aristotle, and this is known by the light of reason. But the divine law is not known by reason. Now, very important question. Does divine law conflict with natural law? No. So again, does the truth of reason conflict with revelation? No. Revelation supplements reason. Reason has limits. Reason has limits, and because reason has limits, we also need revelation. And in some, because again, see, Aquinas, in his own mind, is perfectly rational. And in fact, Aquinas writes this important book, Summa contra Gentiles, right? The Summa against the Gentiles, summary against the Gentiles, so against non-Christians, where he tries to rationally convince anybody who's not a Christian to become a Christian. First and foremost, the Jews and the Muslims. He thinks that he can provide rational arguments for why they should choose Christianity. Purely rational arguments. But again, so we talk about sources of medieval political philosophy. So we are talking about, usually, most of the time, reason plus revelation. Reason plus revelation. So basically, if you want Greeks plus the Bible. This is usually what we are talking about in the Middle Ages. I mean, you will find sometimes an odd philosopher who doesn't subscribe to this, but this is the usual position. And Aquinas is going to say there is no conflict. In fact, one supplements the other. In fact, reason leads you to seek revelation because reason has limits. And by reason, you discover the limits of reason and you seek out revelation because there are certain questions to which there can be no answer. Examples. Aquinas, for example, says that if you ask yourself, does the world have a beginning or was the world eternal? Aquinas thinks that logically speaking, you cannot prove it one way or another. So your reason just gives up and says, I don't know. I am limited. I cannot give you the answer, reason says. And therefore, let's seek revelation. And the revelation will tell you, the world is finite, it has been created by God at a particular point in time. You cannot prove this rationally, but reason tells you that you need to seek this revelation from God. And this is what we talk about with divine law. Divine law, so basically, it's like natural law tells you, don't kill, don't steal, and this is what you know intuitively or intellectually. Everybody knows this, supposedly, that you should not kill, should not steal, should not rape. But also there's this, for example, there's this question, should you circumcise? Обрезание, right? And Aquinas is going to say, reason or intellect doesn't tell you whether you should or should not, but the Bible, the revelation will. Or, or how you should baptize people, or how you should administer Eucharist, or some of that. Things like, especially things related to ritual, something like that. But you should take a day off and use it to worship God. But which day of the week should this be? You don't know. Well, it should be Sunday. How do you know? Through divine law, not through revelation, and not through reason. Okay, so again, so Aquinas is Aristotle plus the Bible. Aquinas is Aristotle, 1, 2, plus the Bible. Aquinas is Aristotle, left column, plus the Bible, right column. Now, let's return to the question I asked. Let's return to the question I asked a couple moments ago. So, again, being a teleologist, in line with Aristotle, Aquinas believes that most communities will be good. And you will, at the same time, achieve happiness here and in the afterlife. And in fact, Augustine says that you have to hate yourself in order to love God. But Aquinas thinks that most of the time you will do good things for yourself and you will be happy here. And these are exactly the kinds of things that you need to do in order to be rewarded in the afterlife. So not sinning is actually like a good policy which will make you happy here and now. Like, it's not just a law, but it's also a good idea. That kind of reasoning. And again, most people need communities in order to thrive. Now, Aristotle has this famous phrase. This is digression, but let me digress for 1 second. Aristotle has this famous phrase that man is by nature a political animal, and if you are outside the polis, you're either an animal, below human, or you are above human. Not sure exactly what Aristotle is talking about when he says above human. Some commentators think he's talking about philosophers, although I'm skeptical about that because philosophers do need human community for Aristotle to flourish. But Aquinas has a different answer. Oh yes, there are people who can be outside communities, saints. And his example is Saint Anthony. So it is in principle possible to be happy outside of human community, but this is reserved for very few and very rare individuals. So man is by nature social and political animal, except Saint Anthony, who is above humanity and people like him. Anyway, go back to this important question. So the important question is this: what happens if you are not living in a good community? What happens if the positive law contradicts the law of nature? What happens if Hitler comes to power? Well, again, for Augustine, tyranny is a test, and you're supposed to submit. For Aquinas, not so. It is, and this is John Locke is going to take this from Aquinas. So again, there's this notion that every human being alive on planet Earth, whether they're Christian or not, it doesn't matter, have, by the natural light of their own reason, know what the natural law is. And this natural law prohibits certain things. So when the king, or somebody, or a council, let's say a king, becomes tyrannical, you understand this, you recognize this, and it is your duty to yourself and to God to resist violence. To resist violence, to protect yourself and to protect others. But at the same time, the Bible says that all power comes from God. Again, the Bible says resist, and remember, the Bible also says resist not evil. If somebody strikes you on the left cheek, turn the other also, right? So the Bible seems to say submit, always submit, because all power is from God. So all power from God. Well, what Aquinas solves this dilemma in the following fashion. He's going to say, yes, as an individual person, you are never allowed to resist the government. So if you alone, by the light of your own personal reason, think that the government is unjust, you are not allowed to do anything whatsoever, because you do not have the authority from God to do this. So the only people who can resist are either inferior magistrates. Now, inferior magistrates is not a term that Aquinas uses. This is a term that Luther uses, but I'm going to use it anyway. So you either, so let me write tyrants somewhere. Well, actually, I don't know. So, somewhere. Let's say here. It's complicated. So in case of tyranny, you either need to find an inferior magistrate So, the ordinary citizen is not allowed to disobey the king, but a prince may. Because the prince has the sword from God. Or you need to find a representative of the people. Representative of the people. Now, who is the representative of the people and how this is supposed to work? Aquinas doesn't say. But again, the idea is that you individually, you are not allowed to resist. Either people get together and they elect a representative, or you try to appeal to a lesser magistrate. Inferior magistrate, lesser magistrate. So, представитель исполнительной власти, somebody who is below the king who is breaking the law, something like that. But all of this has to be done. All of this has to be done only if you think that the advantages will exceed the disadvantages of this. That the good that will come from your actions can reasonably be expected to exceed the harm. So the benefit has to exceed the harm. So basically we're saying that maybe the king is indeed tyrannical, but he's not too tyrannical. And if you make a revolution, this is going to cause more chaos than cure evil. So sometimes a small evil maybe should just be left alone. And in general, this is Aquinas' answer to all cases like this. So cases of tyranny, or cases of when you're trying to defend yourself, self-defense, or cases of war. So Aquinas has this famous doctrine of just war, справедливая война. Aquinas and Augustine as well. Both of them think that there are good reasons for Christians to go to war sometimes. But it's important that when you decide to wage a just war, you need to reasonably expect that the benefits of the war will exceed the harm that you are causing. Okay, most important question. What is the best form of government for Aquinas? Well, following Aristotle, Aquinas is going to say, because you see, this is teleology. We do not care about origins. This is not social contract. This is anti-social contract. Because it doesn't matter how government was constituted. Maybe your king was a conqueror at first. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The origins of the government don't matter. What matters is the function of the government. Whether the government rules for the common good or not, or at least approximately for the common good. So many forms of government are possible, but the best form of government for Aquinas would be monarchy, obviously. I mean, nobody's surprised to hear that, right? The best form of government is monarchy. Let me write this here, probably. After all, there's one God in the universe. There's one head on the shoulders. So there should be one head of state, says Aquinas. But following Aristotle, you will not be surprised to hear that actually the best regime is mixed regime, is monarchy, which is limited by democratic and aristocratic institutions. So actually monarchy, but even better than monarchy is mixed regime or limited monarchy. Now, obviously, Aquinas takes this from Aristotle, but Aquinas is Aristotle plus the Bible. He will find a biblical example. Biblical examples come to mind of mixed regimes. I shudder to think how many of you actually read the Bible. Well, Aquinas is an example of Moses. It says Moses was the sole leader of the Jews. So he was like a king. But his authority was limited by the council of the elders. And the council of the elders has popular support. So it's like council of the elders is approved by the people, and council of the elders limit the power of the monarch. So this is what Aquinas is talking about. And notice, this is again, you might not share Aquinas' beliefs and values. You might not be a Christian. But this is important historically in the history of the West, because Aquinas in general rehabilitates politics. It used to be, especially before Aquinas, Augustine was dominant, this notion that politics is dirty. You should not engage in politics if you can help it. Like, politics is not for good people. Only evil people engage in politics. Like, if you want to engage in politics, something is wrong with you. And you will probably burn in hell. Well, you'll probably burn in hell either way, but you understand. It's a sign that you will, even more likely that you will burn in hell. But Aquinas says, no. Good life includes political participation. Again, for Aristotle, against Plato. For Plato, politics is a necessary evil, for the Neoplatonic Plato. But for Aristotle, you can only be properly happy and properly human if you engage in politics. If you take active participation in politics, preferably in the mixed regimes where virtuous people, excellent people, take turns ruling and being ruled, for Aristotle. So Aquinas rehabilitates political life, and this will lay the basis for further political developments, especially Republican political developments in the history of political philosophy in the West. So Aquinas, again, is to some extent a forerunner of the Republican tradition. So let me write this again carefully, as always, with a question mark. Republican tradition. Last question about Aquinas, and then we'll talk about other people. What about the Pope? What about church and state? Well, here you see the trouble is that Aquinas does not have a systematic treatise on politics. He wrote this huge book, which is like Summa Theologia, right? The summary of theology, and he deals with a million questions in passing, but he doesn't really have a full-fledged theory of politics. But it seems it's like Aquinas is going to say that something like this. Let me write a very precise formula on the board. Pope, because now we are talking about papacy. Pope did not exist back here. Papa Rimsky. So this was not instituted. There was a bishop of Rome, but he was not yet considered to be this ultimate figure. But here, we already have the papacy. So Pope is more important than the king. And strictly speaking, according to Aquinas, the plenitude of power belongs to Pontifex Maximus. Right? So the Pope has the plenitude of power on earth. Let me be very precise and very rigorous. Or not. LOL. Something like this. Okay? This is almost a direct quote from Aquinas. Why? Because again, similarly, as in the case with civil disobedience, Aquinas doesn't really give any precedence. Like he hasn't participated in any particular debates between church and state. So like it seems that in principle Pope should have plenitude of power, and that the church should be and that the state should be subordinate to the church. So again, remember, in Augustine, the state is above the church, but in Aquinas, it seems that the church should be above the state. But he doesn't draw out the implications. He doesn't quite come out and say this in so many words. So it's like it's there in Aquinas, but also not there. So yeah, or not, LOL, who knows? It's confusing. I mean, like you could read Aquinas in such a way, but he doesn't have like a clear, direct, established position on this point. Okay. So let's shift gears. And let's talk about two other philosophers. So 4 names in 1 lecture. That's a lot, but we have to try. So the 2 other philosophers, I can probably erase this. 2 other philosophers, although it's such a beautiful picture. Let me redraw it here. Reason, revelation, and reason establishes its limits. And that's why reason leads you to seek revelation. Anyway, so the 2 philosophers are William of Ockham and Marsilius of Padua. This might be tricky, but let's see if it's going to work. Something like this. I really hate erasing stuff on the board, because as soon as I erase something, I need it immediately. So Marsilius of Padua and William of Ockham. So let me just write Marsilius, known in Latin as Marsilio. Marsilius and William of Ockham. So, okay, Aquinas, church and state. Pope is more important than the king, or not. But Marsilius and Ockham cannot afford to take this position. So Marsilius and Ockham are writing after Aquinas, and they are writing during a crisis of the papacy. They are writing at the time, historical details are not important, when the Pope is trying to assert political authority over the princes. More specifically, there's a conflict between Pope John the 12th or something and Ludwig of Bavaria, who is the Holy Roman Emperor. Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, but that's a separate issue. Some of you might know from school what the Holy Roman Empire was. Like the precursor to Austria, something like that. Precursor to the Austrian Empire. So, basically, so both Marsilius and Ockham will insist that Pope's power should be limited. Now, more specifically, Marsilius is going to say that the state has to be above the church. So we are talking about, if you want, separation of state from the church. State is not church, and church is subordinate to the state. Church is subordinate to the state. Ockham is going to say no. State is on the one side, church is on the other side, and they should not interfere in one another's affairs. So basically, Ockham is going to say, unless there's some horrible crisis, the church should stay out of the affairs of the state, and the state should stay out of the affairs of the church. Okay, so this is the most important. These are the most important ideas of Marsilius and Ockham, and now I can take my time explaining the rest. And if I run out of time, you have the basic picture, which is the most important thing that we need. Okay, so Marsilius is a wonderful political philosopher. He's such a joy to read. To a large extent, a very important forerunner of Thomas Hobbes and to some extent Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So Marsilius is my favorite of the bunch, I have to say. Marsilius is a treat, you gotta love Marsilius. So his most important work is called The Defender of Peace. The Defender of Peace. Defense of Pacis, something like this. Now, the name of the title of the work is important because this is the most important political value for Marsilius. Peace. And in an important respect, peace, even though it is not the supreme good, nevertheless, peace provides the basis, the necessary condition for both material prosperity, so your material well-being, security, food, commodities, that kind of thing. And by the way, so both Ockham and Marsilius are Aristotelians. So they will more or less agree with this whole picture, okay? So they agree that life, they're anti-Augustinian. Life is not a vale of tears. Participating in politics is good and all right. Anyway, so peace is the condition of material prosperity, but also of salvation. But the most important thing is peace. And Marsilius says that basically Aristotle is the perfect philosopher. Aristotle already told us everything we need to know about politics and about how we can establish peace. Except there's one thing. Aristotle did not know about the plague because the plague happened after Aristotle died. And this plague is called papacy. Marsilius really hates the Pope. Why does he hate the Pope? Well, first of all, again, I suppose there are a couple of reasons. First of all, Marsilius, for a change, just for fun, reads the Bible. Open the Bible and find where the Bible talks about the Pope. I dare you. The Bible doesn't. It's an institution which emerged much later. Now, specifically, what Marsilius finds in the Bible is he finds a couple of things. The first thing that he finds is that the clergy, so the priests, should be poor. They should not have property. They should be communists, no property. So basically, again, so if you are a clergyman, you should have no property whatsoever. How do you survive? You beg, and other people feed you. So, like, you have absolutely nothing, then a person lends you a piece of food in order for you to eat it. It's not yours, You are eating it with the permission of the person. You are eating it and satiate your body, but at no point in time does food become your property. You should have no property whatsoever. And this is in the Bible, yes, because the Bible, some people, especially ISF students, forget this, but Jesus actually says that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter paradise. Like a clearest possible statement. If you have something, according to Jesus, and you want to not burn in hell for all eternity, you have to take everything you have, sell it, and give to the poor. And live by begging, basically, and not own anything. This is what it's like. It's not a good idea. No. It is a necessary condition to enter into paradise. So first of all, church should be poor. Church should have no property. This is not a class in history, but you can imagine the illustriousness and the corruption of the Catholic Church at the time. Basically, the popes living like kings in luxury in Rome. And Marsilius hates this. Luther is going to hate this as well. Marsilius is one of the important forerunners of the Protestant Reformation. So you should not have any property. And secondly, you should actually have no power. The task of the church is to educate. So your function is to educate. You should not have power, no power. And in fact, he says all decisions in the church should be taken by the community. So basically, community elects priests. And actually, all priests are equal. So all priests are equal. So any priest is, strictly speaking, equal to any other priest. So a priest in a local church has as much power as the Bishop of Rome. Why does Marsilius say this? Read the Bible. Because this is how early Christians dealt with each other. Again, the papacy usually refers to Peter, how Jesus says to Peter, you are my rock, and on this rock I will build my church, says Jesus to Peter. And allegedly, Pope is an heir, naslедник of Peter. But, if you actually look how Peter is treated in the Bible, Apostle Peter, he doesn't have power. They discuss. They meet together in a council. And this is the key word for Marsilius, council. And in some sense, well, again, this is why Marsilius is one of the forerunners of the Republican tradition. So people are sovereign. People are sovereign. And people elect councils, and these councils, if you want, both decide religious matters and matters of state. But, strictly speaking, again, the church has to be subordinate to the state. So councils can decide religious doctrine, but religious figures will never have political positions. So it's like, we can try to do this. It's like people elect the sovereign, people are sovereign. People are sovereign. People elect the ruler, the political ruler, and people also elect the church. And the ruler has priority over the church. So for Marsilius, it's like this. Sorry, Ockham. I need more space. This is still not good. And again, being a good Aristotelian and a Thomist, Marsilius thinks that, reason rules in this world. So most people, when the councils, universal councils, Вселенские соборы, when people get together, they know what is true. They can interpret the Bible in the right fashion. And basically, only it's not the Pope, but only the universal councils which have infallibility. So popes can make mistakes, popes can become heretics. So Pope could be a heretic. And if Pope becomes a heretic, the people will judge. Well, actually, the councils will judge. The councils will judge the Pope. And so, basically, the pictures that... So, Peter and Paul. Do you know this very famous question? Should non-Jews be circumcised? Should non-Jewish Christians be circumcised? It's not like Peter says, look, Jesus made me the boss and you all obey me. No. Peter and the rest of the apostles get together, they discuss, and in fact, Peter's position loses because Peter's position, everybody should be circumcised, and Paul's position wins. It's the council, not the individual. And it's in the Bible, in the book of Acts. If you want to look this up, God forbid. So again, so why is Marsilius so opposed to papacy? Because he wants to say it's very important that the most important thing is peace. Peace is the most important thing in political life. So we talk about politics, common good. The necessary condition of the common good is peace. And Marsilius says, if there are two people who have conflictual authority, if the Pope tries to assert authority over the prince, then you have civil war. So in order to prevent civil war, in order to protect peace, there has to be one authority, and this one authority has to come from the people. Maybe you have a monarchy, it's fine for Marsilius, but this monarchy has to be approved by the people. You can even have hereditary monarchy, but it has to exist with the consent of the people. And so it's like you have one authority, so people choose one authority. This one authority produces peace, and this peace increases material prosperity of people, so people's material well-being, and also allows councils to convene and people to read and discuss the Bible. And so through peace you secure both material prosperity and happiness in this life and salvation in the next life. material prosperity in this life and salvation in the afterlife. And they work together. They're not opposed like in Augustine. Okay. Ockham. In Ockham in 1 minute. Well, basically what Ockham is going to say, Ockham defends this standard medieval view. Ockham defends the standard medieval view that, well, not standard, but one of the positions. Ockham does not think that the church needs to be subordinate to the state. He imagines that no, actually Pope's power does, so against Marsilius, I probably should have talked about Ockham before Marsilius, because Marsilius kind of proves Ockham wrong, or whatever. So that the Pope has power from God through Peter, but what is important about Ockham, the most important thing about Ockham, is that these are two different powers and they have different domains. That basically, so this is going to be my Ockham space somewhere. This is going to be plenty of. So Ockham basically says that the Pope deals with matters of salvation of the soul, and the state deals with matters of security and that kind of thing. And they should not intervene with one another. There should be a separation. And he says that the only time when one can interfere in another is at the time of crisis. So for example, if your ruler becomes a tyrant, then the Pope can intervene in the affairs on behalf of the people, so to speak, for the common good, because Ockham is also an Aristotelian. Again, Cicero, Salus populi suprema lex. The highest law is the common good of the people, is the health of the people, right? It's the good of the nation. And likewise, the only time when the state can intervene in the affairs of the church, if there's a crisis. Like what crisis, for example? Like the following crisis. If the Pope becomes a heretic. Now, this is an interesting question. Who will declare Pope a heretic? Well, it's going to be the council also. But, you see, according to church doctrine, and Ockham against Marsilius wants to save church doctrine. And according to church doctrine, Pope is infallible. Pope cannot make mistakes. So how can Pope be a heretic? And here where Ockham comes in, and he says that the Pope, strictly speaking, cannot be a heretic, but the Pope can ipso facto be a heretic. Ipso facto. As a matter of fact. And when the Pope becomes a heretic, he stops being Pope immediately. So the council can never judge the present Pope, but if the Pope becomes a heretic, he stops being the Pope, and so the council judges him, but not as a Pope, but just as a random person who is a heretic. And specifically, how do you know that the Pope has become ipso facto heretic? And he's going to say, well, you have the moral law, which is known to us by reason, because again, Aquinas, Ockham, and Marsilius are all Aristotelians. We have reason. God gave us reason. So if the Pope violates reason, and let's say declares that 2 + 2 is equal to 5, he becomes a heretic and stops being the Pope. Or if he opposes tradition. Well, actually, the church tradition, or teachings of the church. So, and basically, tradition is the Bible plus the history of Catholic Church. So it's like if at some point in the past, the Catholic Church, in the eyes of the Pope, has pronounced certain things, and then the next Pope tries to correct that, he's a heretic, automatically. Example, so an earlier Pope said the church should not have any property. And then the next Pope, this guy, John, against whom Ludwig of Bavaria fights, says, no, this was a mistake or misinterpretation. Actually, the church should have property, it's fine. And Ockham says, oops, you have ipso facto become a heretic, you stop being Pope. Because you have violated a doctrine of the church which has been previously established. And so, I suppose that the most important idea in Ockham is that all power is limited. The power of the Pope and the power of the Prince is always limited. So in their own sphere, their power is complete, but it is limited by basically by what? So both Pope and State are limited by reason and revelation, if you want. And so if the king violates the laws of reason, he stops being the king and becomes a tyrant. Now, what exactly do you do with tyrants is not perfectly clear, because I kind of feel, okay, so this is off the record, I'm not sure, but I feel that Marsilius and Ockham would probably agree with Aquinas and saying that if individual human beings can just decide by themselves that the king has become a tyrant, that's probably a bad idea. Probably what you should do is, if you think that the king has become a tyrant, you should publish books and publish pamphlets and try to tell other people that the king has become a tyrant, and then you try to resolve this peacefully, or if not, maybe also to these inferior magistrates, which is basically going to be the procedure in the Protestant Reformation. Okay. So, here's our story. Augustine, Neoplatonist, the basic position in the Middle Ages based on the Bible, and then Aquinas, Marsilius, and Ockham laying the foundation of future republicanism, all to some extent. We'll try to reintroduce Aristotelian ideas, rehabilitate politics, and emphasize reason in this lecture. If you have any questions, I would be glad to answer. Otherwise, thank you so very much for your attention. I hope this was clear. I hope this was fun. And I will see you either in the seminar or on the exam. Good luck. See you.